Hey everybody, this is Alex Gonzalez with Be More Ventures. We're on this is the fifth installment of BMV and Barbecue. I'm here with Eric Berger, the executive director of Shelter KC. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Executive director. So I'm just gonna jump right into it. Oh, Shelter Kansas City is a foundation which they help the homeless community of Kansas City, and you want to expound a little bit more on what you guys do?
Yeah, we're an emergency shelter for men, and then we also have a Christian-based alcohol and drug recovery program for men, but also for women who have also dealt with trauma in their life.
Okay, okay. How did you get affiliated with Shelter KC?
Well, I've been in rescue mission work since college. Started volunteering in the mission in Seattle, Washington,
Okay.
and so it's one of these things. We're now for 35 years later, and I've served in different cities. But about 2 years ago, an opportunity came to come to Kansas City, and a lot of my family lives here, and I've kind of
Mm.
wanted to. Be able to connect with them, and of course, my secondary team. I'm still a Seahawks guy, but my secondary team has always been the Chiefs. And
Gotcha.
so when I lived in Texas, I could never become a Cowboys fan. So it's much easier. It's much easier when you're a Russell Wilson fan to also be a Patrick Mahomes fan is not a tough thing.
Yeah, the prototype is kind of there, right? Yeah. So you lived in Seattle for a little while. Your family's been in Kansas City for a while before you moved here. Or they
Ken,
moved come down.
my folks moved here almost 35 years
No
ago,
kidding.
but I was already an adult. And so and both of my daughters ended up living here.
Mm.
It was an opportunity to come back here. But the last I was in East Texas, where Patrick Mahomes is from. That's the theme in Longview, Tyler, and was there for 10 years. Loved doing the work, but kind of got to a point where it was okay. Are we ready for a new challenge? One of the neat things about being in medium-sized cities is it's easier to work with city. It's easier to work with other folks.
Mm.
It's easier to mobilize things. There's still a great need, but at some point you kind of only can do so much. Um, Here it's a little bit overwhelming. It's like, okay, where do you start?
Okay.
And in some ways, the good news is that we have a lot of organizations that are working with the homeless. The bad news is we have a lot of organizations
Oh,
that
no
work with the
kidding.
homeless because you have all these different segmentations.
Got you.
So it's a good news, bad news.
Okay. And so, is that kind of like a situation in which, so it's bad if because it's not necessarily bad. I don't think you're saying that it's bad that there's so many different organizations, but it's hard to um, find out the pinpoint what needs to be done.
Well, it's hard to coordinate.
Okay.
Also, let's say you're in a situation. Let me back up a little bit. The homeless population kind of fit into two main groups,
Okay.
and that is the majority are having a temporary crisis. They've lost a job, maybe got sick, and lost their job because they were sick, lost their coverage. Um, Maybe they had two income family, now all of a sudden a one income family. Um, Went from a full time to a part time employee. All those things, what I'd be calling a temporary crisis. And that actually is the majority of the folks that are homeless.
Okay.
They don't seem like it though, because the folks who their life is a crisis are the folks that doesn't matter how much shelter or housing, they've got some core issues. You're talking addiction, you're talking undiagnosed mental health issues, you're talking about maybe being just in violent relationships over and over again, trauma issues in their lives, and often sometimes that's who the majority of the homeless are perceived of, because that's the person that you might go
Mm-hmm.
down the street, they're high, and so you perceive that, okay, that person's homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the person that sometimes has the whole face of homelessness. On a given night, there's actually more women and children, there's more single moms in shelters than there is single men. But that's not what the perception is, because you see her at Walmart, you don't perceive her as homeless,
Yeah.
but you see somebody outside looking a certain way with holding a sign. Um, Boom, that person. But that person often, not always, But if there's an addiction issue, if there's an undiagnosed mental health issue, they've got to work through those issues. And that's where I'm kind of going back through in a smaller community. If you're not ready to change, we can build some relationship with you and say, hey, if you're willing to do X and X, you can come back. Well, here you can just go from one shelter to another shelter. You can bounce around a lot more. And so sometimes even some of the folks who really need our services, we never get to know because they might not ever even come into Shelter KC. And especially where you're located up here in the Northland, you may have folks that all the services are downtown.
Yeah.
But they're originally from here, so they're going. But they maybe have a drug issue, but they're going from one couch to another couch, to staying in the woods, to staying in a car, and we might not ever connect with that person. So that's some of the challenges in a bigger city.
So do you? So if there's somebody's out here in the Northland, I've been noticing out here in Barrie, there's a few. Anyway, are you able to connect with them?
We are, but often, the challenge is what are the elements of change? Is that person ready? And one of the challenges with flying signs is you can bring in about $200 to $300 a day with one of those signs.
Gotcha.
And so one of the challenges is when I encounter and I go to the my Hy-Vee is up there on Barrie Road, so when I encounter folks, I always make the point, hey, let me talk to you, but I'm not ever going to give cash. And I tell people, hey, in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I'll meet you in the restaurant, and I'll be glad to buy you a meal, and let's get to know each other. And 9 out of 10 times, they're not going to take me up on that, because if they got a drug issue, they just want the cash. And so the challenge often sometimes is that person maybe is not in a position to change, or they want to change but they don't know how. And so how do I develop a relation? I want to have that message and relationship, but you may not be ready at that point. And so that's where sometimes the challenge becomes, it's not that we don't need more housing or more services, but sometimes there's a mindset, all you got to do is just plug all of these people here with these services over here. Well, we don't necessarily always have the right beds, or certainly we need much more for single families. But often we have people that they're not ready to change yet. And so it isn't just a matter of having a bed. And that's where, and then you add the unsheltered homeless population that are just chronic out there all the time. 75% are either going to have a drug and alcohol issue, a mental health issue, or a chronic health issue.
Okay.
And 50% are going to have all three. So you then got to really be able to start addressing and dealing with those issues. And that gets more complicated. And then they have to be ready to address those issues. The good news is that if they're willing to address those issues, we're kind of set up for that. Because we want to be more than just that place to stay. We're going to give you a life coach. We got a recovery program. We've got a nurse. We're going to work through and say, okay, let's start peeling away at these core root causes.
Gotcha. Okay, so you do try to tackle issue by issue, individual by individual. It's not like do you have like classes that a group can go to and kind of?
Yeah. So when somebody comes to us, they get a first 14 days just as a gift.
Okay.
This is a gift. Let's get to know you, and they get a life coach at that point.
Gotcha.
Then, as long as they're working through a plan for independence, we're going to keep renewing them. So they're going to meet with that life coach, and with that life coach, let's say, hey, let's have you go to this money management class. Let's have you do this. We got support groups. We have chaplains available. We're going to help you grow spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. And so some of that we might work into the plan. Some of that's just, hey, this is available. Then there's other folks that they have a knowledge that they have a substance abuse issue, or they have a knowledge that they have both a mental health and a substance abuse issue in our women's center, and they're more in a structured program, and those programs are actually 9 months long.
Got you.
And so, but one of the advantages of that being connected at the mission is that you might have came in just because it was cold tonight. You might have had no intention to do anything but stay a night, and then the next night you decided to stay. And then we started talking to you about having a plan. And maybe you didn't even acknowledge that you have a substance abuse problem. All you wanted to do is just go get a job. Well, as we worked with you and we looked at your history, and maybe getting a job isn't going to work because you got this other issue going here, is then it goes, yeah, maybe I do need to address this issue. One of the things with people in addiction is you always know somebody who's worse than you. So you always know people you can identify as an addict, but you may not even have gotten to that point. So often we have people that's not why they came, but as we start working with them, as we start showing them things, as they start seeing things, as maybe their family starts speaking into things, we can go, yeah, you're ready for change. And I think that is one of the things that's unique about the rescue mission model is, it takes like sometimes 2 weeks to get into a recovery program. Well, you can show up today, then we're going to house you.
Okay.
And you don't have to make a commitment to that program just to get in the door today.
How many, you said a rescue mission model, how many of those exist out here in Kansas City, do you know?
So there's actually two. There's
two of them?
There's Shelter KC, which was known as the Kansas City Rescue Mission, and then City Union Mission kind of follows kind of the same model.
Gotcha.
And we do some of the same things they do, but they have the ability to do much more women and kids.
Mm-hmm.
They have a much stronger piece on there. And so we kind of try to, okay, what's kind of our niche versus kind of what their niche is. They're of the true emergency shelters that you can just kind of walk in one day.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much us in City Union.
Gotcha.
There's another program called Restart that a real solid program, and they have a little bit more the ability where they have like an under 18 shelter. They have a lot more segmentation. But it is a little bit more where you have to kind of sign up to be in a program.
Gotcha.
And it's a little, I wouldn't say it's transitional, but it's kind of a little bit more established. But the advantage they have is, like I said, they're much more, here's their youth shelter. Here's their, they have more different specialized facilities.
Gotcha. So with the temporary crises, homeless population, so you did attribute it to full-time to part-time. I'm sure COVID, destroyed it did destroy a lot of lives. So is there a housing crisis as well? Like, I've read a couple things on articles about not necessarily a crisis, but the fact that low-income housing is kind of being torn down and being less available to those that sound like those in temporary homelessness could benefit from. Do you see that as an issue out here in Kansas City or no?
Yeah, I think the challenge is some folks, even if the housing's available, they wouldn't be able to maintain it.
Okay.
If their life is still out of control. So then the question is, so if we just had more housing, that isn't going to necessarily solve certain issues. There's certainly missing things in the housing market, and that is, you're looking at that single mom with 3 kids, her ability to do that without subsidized housing, and having that be in a safe place. That's certainly a missing piece.
Okay.
The ability, single occupancy, so you don't necessarily have to have a roommate, because if your roommate goes off the deep end, are you in trouble? Those things are missing pieces. I would say one of the things that, though, that Kansas City is really blessed is there are a lot of Oxford houses. And Oxford houses are for those that have had a history of using and then live in a sober housing. And you basically kind of, they connect you with other people in recovery, and they're more close to work. They're all over Northland or in Kansas or in downtown. And like 6 to 8 people might live in that house together. And so you have a room with a shared bathroom. So one, it's a much more affordable, but you've got a support group.
Gotcha.
And there's some self accountability, because if you start using again, then they vote you off the island for all practical purposes.
Really? Okay.
And so that's not a fit for everybody, and not everybody needs that.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things is if you're finally in recovery, just going back into a certain neighborhood where using's all the time, you're going to be back doing that.
Yeah,
In
absolutely.
a heartbeat. And once again, the majority of the homeless do not necessarily have an addiction issue, but the majority of the people that have been homeless a long time are more likely to. So it's making that differential. And I think that's the biggest thing is what are the things that can be done when somebody first loses that job to not, what are the assistance programs to help them with that 2 months of rent?
Yeah.
So they don't lose the place in the first. Because once you do that, now getting back is much tougher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where you got two incomes and the boyfriend leaves or the husband takes off and now you got a single parent and she or he is just trying to hang on.
Yeah.
And they hang on too long. Landlord maybe even gives them a little break and so on, but then they're just hoping in 3 days and then that doesn't happen and then all of a sudden everything just kind of blows up all at one time. And those are the things that our programs, those are the things that connection with churches, the family, the depth of the family just isn't what it used to be.
In terms of media or just all the
Well,
entire thing?
in all kinds of things. I mean, you look at all kinds. So the depth, the collapse of the family relates to poverty because look at how much now you have it where if you've got a single adult at the mission working with us, but he's got 3 kids of 3 different moms. Well, he can't support all of those families well.
Right. Yeah.
And you got a single mom the same way. So here so that certainly the more stable a family is, the more economically secure it is. But also more going is you got somebody that gets sick. Well, in the past, would go home and be with mom. But if you don't have that relation and you get back on your feet and you wouldn't have to. But we've got folks that don't have that connection with family anymore. Mm-hmm. That depth of if you have that temporary crisis, the first line would be family. I'm not saying people don't have that, but not at the depth they used to.
Yeah, gotcha. And so what is a solution like? So you have the some folks they were starting to get behind, right? And then the worst case scenario happens, they get evicted, whatever happens, and they're now in a temporary crisis. What is the solution that you offer them immediately to help them get back somewhere?
Well, I think one of the keys, and this is the toughest one, is people wait too long to come into a shelter.
Okay.
Because they have a mindset that I'm not homeless if I'm not in the shelter. Because there's a stereotype there. The challenge then is you're now deeper in debt. Now you didn't pay your car insurance. Now you get pulled over for not driving insurance. So now you got that fine. That's now you got a warrant out for you. And no one's going to take you to jail for it, but it's keeping you from getting employment and housing. And so by the time you come to Shelter KC, and the life coach is trying to unpack all of these things.
Gotcha.
Versus if that person that came to us, like when this first happened, their time in shelter may have only been 14 days. Instead, it maybe takes 3 or 4 months because, man, they got to get the warrant taken care of. We got to work with this. There's now a bad history with the landlord that needs to be repaired. And so, and I get it, but that's one of the things is encouraging people to come sooner rather than later. And part of that is their mindset is that we're just a place for a cot and I can find a better place to stay. Well, yeah, but what you also need is somebody who can sit down with you and kind of work through a plan and be able to connect you with resources. And hey, if you're underemployed, I think that's one of the things that, right now, there's a job shortage. Um, you can get a full-time job now at a higher wage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that'll last long, but that's an advantage. But in the last 5, 6 years, that unskilled job that if you just showed up on time and were honest, you could have a full-time job. Well, that's been kind of replaced by if you don't have at least some sort of a trade, if you don't have, and that doesn't mean you have to have a 4-year college, but if you don't have that AVAC certification, or at least a CNA, a nursing assistant certification, or something, they're not hiring people as much full time at the convenience stores at a reasonable wage. You're going to hire a bunch of part time and have 3 or 4 managers.
Gotcha.
And like I said, that might be shifting a little bit now, that we might be going back to some of that with the housing shortage.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we'd sit down with you and say, hey, let's maybe not have you go back to job. Let's have you go do a training. Because
Gotcha.
let's get you to a higher skill level.
Got you. So you can sit down with them. So when they come in and they get assigned that life coach, is that life coach basically that's the person you're communicating with each and every time, each and every day? They're kind of checking up with you and.
Yep.
Got you.
Yeah, and we've got about, the nice thing is they might only have about 15 people that they're working through. And some people, they've already got a plan before they walk through the door. There's some folks, matter of fact, it's just a timing thing. I need to save up X amount of money so I can pay for the first month's deposit. I'm already back to work. I've done X, but staying in my car just isn't working with trying to work a job. So I need to shower. I need this. And they walk in and they already have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And we just go, okay. And we just buy into that. Or I'm so far behind in my child support. And what I just need to do is I need to just get a big dent in getting that paid. And we go, okay, great. Because we're not going to charge you here while you're taking care of that.
Mm-hmm.
But others, they're just trying to think about where they're going to spend tomorrow night.
Mm-hmm.
What they're going to do today. Maybe they're not acknowledging some issues in their life. Those are the folks that we need to kind of, through relationships, kind of go, the guy who just says he needs a job. Well, let's talk about your job history. How many jobs have you had? Well, where have you been losing those jobs? You only seem to be getting fired on Monday. Then let's talk about what's happening on Friday, Saturday, what's happening on the weekend. If there is maybe a substance abuse issue, or maybe you got a money management issue, or maybe you got an anger issue, let's instead of just keep on getting you back into the job market to have the same thing happen, let's help you identify what that is.
That's great.
And that can vary from person to person.
Sure. Yeah, just case by case, right?
Yep.
Now, do you, you said you guys aim to do physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, like the whole plane of existence, really, the whole ways to perceive how you live. Now, so you came on to Shelter KC, right, as the executive director. They hired you from outside.
Yeah, I had worked at other missions.
Uh-huh.
I ran a mission called Highway 80 Rescue Mission in Tyler and Longview, Texas.
Okay.
And before that, I had directed a mission in Great Falls, Montana, which is a little different. And then I had, then about the other half of my mission work was actually doing more youth and family work in different housing projects in West Virginia, Seattle, and New Jersey. So, somewhat of a cross country.
You gotta see a lot.
Experience, yeah.
How as it pertains to in comparison to the other places you've been, how heavy do you think the issue is out here in Kansas City for the homeless? I don't know what you want to call it, but the homeless crisis.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is everything relates to other things. Okay. So when you talk about the homeless crisis, it directly relates to the violence and drug crisis. So you look at certain neighborhoods that have a higher drug and a higher violence issue. Well, hey, who's victimized of that? So you got a single mom who's being beat up and trying to flee from that. That puts her into homelessness. You got somebody who's now addicted, that keeps them from losing their job. So sometimes we want to talk about homelessness as if it's in this bubble, and so it's just a housing issue. And don't misunderstand me, we need housing. But the other issues that we have, homelessness is now a cause and effect of the other of the other things. They don't just kind of sit. The violence doesn't sit over here. 70% of women who are homeless has experienced abuse or violence as both a child and an adult. 30% of males who are homeless have usually been victims of assault in the last year. So those things sometimes can interconnect and attach with each other.
So homelessness can almost be the solution to a problem.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing: is that also depending on where you're at, and this is where back. Are you having a crisis? So we just help you with that. Then you're there. Or if your life is a crisis, you might have been a functioning addict and have never dealt with the problem, but now because you have lost housing, you've lost family, now you might be willing to address and deal with things that you weren't ever willing to address.
Gotcha.
So that's the good news often, and that's why, hey, we're if you're ready to change, we want to make sure we have those things right there, as easy as possible to get you connected with.
Gotcha. What's the biggest challenge of what you do?
I think the biggest challenge is the increase of mentally ill, because I think the challenge is if you're mentally ill and you're not receiving services, then it's really hard, and you don't think you have a challenge, then we can't get you housed, we can't get you a job. And if you're on this great adventure because it all makes sense to you, and I think what's interesting is I think it compared to Texas where I was at, Kansas City actually has an amazing mental health system.
Really?
And if you are ready for services, it's almost like a bidding war. There's providers. I mean, we can pick which place to go to, and for the most part, they're pretty strong. But if you don't think you need that help, if you're not ready for that help, if you're not going to follow through with appointments, and in the past, you would have had involuntary commitments, a danger to self or others. But that's became very narrow. That to say, hey, you really need to be in a program. And so that mentally ill person that doesn't even perceive themselves as mentally ill, that's the biggest challenge. Is how do we get them to a point where they see that they need those services, and how do we make that connection to them? And if you've been non-compliant, then it's hard to get you those services because they don't want to sign you up if you're not going to show up for appointment. So if you're ready for those services, they're great. But if you're kind of on the margins, it's tough.
That is really, really interesting. I would have never thought about that at all. What are some of the mental diseases that you see rampant among the homeless community that they're not seeking help for, that you think you can diagnose that they don't see themselves?
Well, certainly the bipolar, schizophrenic.
Okay.
But you also, just by nature, those things that relate to trauma and depression, and I would say on a regular basis, we've got people that come into our doors suicidal.
Okay.
Now, once again, that's one of those areas that once you hit to that level, there's actually a lot more we can do. Police department comes with a CIT unit, and people don't realize that even though the police respond to those dangers to self or others, they're going to put you into a crisis center. They don't take you to jail, and for the most part, there's a pretty good plan from that point. So you've got a mixed bag. The bigger challenge is that person that isn't quite a danger to self to others, but really can't go past a certain point because they're not going to get a job. They're the folks that you talk to them for 5 minutes and you don't think there's an issue, but that 6 minute all of a sudden gets a little delusional and they kind of seem to be there and you kind of go, probably not going to hire them. Those are the folks that are really going to struggle in this world because like I said, they're not a danger to self or others, but they're not going to be able to have a job. until they address that mental health issue.
Man. And there's a lot of people out there. That's like really. I'm trying as you're talking about that. I'm trying to think like, well, what would be a good idea to solve that? But it's kind of like is that perfect? Not necessarily perfect, but
the resources are there. The other challenge is the person ready?
That's what it comes down
make
to.
the changes. Yeah,
Gotcha.
and if they don't, and that's where it gets a little tougher, because if you, the person that's got a substance abuse issue usually knows they have it, and they're just not at a point where they came to the point that they're ready to change. The good news is when they come to the point, they usually know where to go, and they're ready to go. The person that has an undiagnosed mental health issue that they're not recognizing, they they're not dealing with that issue yet, and that's a tougher place. That's the tougher place. I wouldn't say that that's a large group, but it's the group that's going to stay. That's going to be your chronic homeless. They're going to stay in crisis a much longer time. That's more likely. When you look at the folks out there in the tents, there's more likely a mental health or a substance abuse issue. I'm not saying everybody, but that's a majority reason. Because otherwise, why be out in a tent in the winter?
Yeah.
We're not people aren't being turned away from shelters.
So shelters are fully like there's no overcapacity at shelters either. Huh?
No, and sometimes there's a misnomer about that. And in this winter, one of the things that they're doing collectively, and we're involved, Shelter KC, there's a couple other shelters, is I just came from a meeting with the city emergency management. And so what they're kind of working through is how do we make sure we have good communication, how they deal with when the winter, when that cold weather, life-threatening weather comes, how do we make sure that we can plug people into the shelter, and then if there needs to be an overflow, then that happens after all the shelters are full.
Gotcha.
I get asked regularly, is there enough shelter beds? And the question isn't if there's enough shelter beds, because there usually is, but is it the right bed? And I'll get back to that paranoid, mentally ill person. They might not just want to stay communal. I mean, we have dorm space. We don't have like individual rooms. That you got to live communally. Yeah. So that's something of, hey, do we need to have a mental health shelter separate? Do we need to have that place for the person coming out of the hospital that can accommodate that? There's probably some needs for some special needs. We're in the process of kind of reimagining what a new shelter looks like. We're kind of just in the planning process and really trying to get away from just having these big open bay dorms. Because when I first started working in missions, first mission I worked at held 600 people, but it was just big open bay dorms. It was your locker room showers is kind of a big post, a lot of shower, and it was all about how many people can we get to be warm. Well, these days, there are certainly people that are making the choice that they don't want to be communal. Sometimes those they're not as maybe they should be communal because they're isolating. So where is that balance? And that's something that we're kind of working out. What does that look like? When the city put 500 people in hotels for 90 days, the majority of those people still were homeless after the 90 days. So that paranoid person hotel was great, but they didn't get connected in any services when the 90 days was up. They still ended up being homeless. So how do we do that?
Gotcha.
We're still figuring out.
What do you think? Do you have any idea on what you would see as a reimagined shelter?
Yeah, we started to work on that. Now it's kind of finalizing that and starting on the fundraising process. So one of the things that we're looking at is just even redoing our dorms. There's a process called Step Up, which is a more of there'd be no bottom bunks. Right now we have a big bunk room. And there's a design process called Step Up. You can look it up. Step Up beds. You can look it up on the internet, where one way faces one way and the other way faces the other way. It's a little hard to explain just with my thumbs, but it's more of a cube then. And
Okay.
so then, what the Step Up is if you're on the top bunk, there's actually steps that go up. So now it's a bottom bunk, has a locker, has a changing station. So it's not like having an individual room, but almost like these Japanese hotel like modules that they were doing.
Okay.
And so we're looking at adding some of those. So the more, especially when you're starting to work a job, you'd have a locker and such, but have some privacy, but not the same as that. You'd still strive to get your own apartment, still strive to do those things. And that's where the challenge is a little bit is, hey, we want to give you that individual space, but we want you to still strive to get your own place. So how do where does that balance come in?
That's a good idea.
The other thing is we're looking at having much more entrances, and much more common areas, much more have. We're in a crossroads, so have much more of a look of like what does a coffee shop look like. I think one of the biggest things that is a barrier is folks need to be in a relationship. And when you have a lot of people, that your first experience is how do we get everybody bedded down? Here's where the rules are. This is what you need to do. And one of the things that we're trying to do is shift a little bit. Those things are important. But how do I get to know your name? How do I get to know? How do I know if you're having a temporary crisis or your life is a crisis? Because that relates to how we serve you, how we connect with you.
Mm-hmm. So, and you think the idea of it being like more like a coffee shop is more inviting? Is that the idea behind making it more looking like that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things is, can we make that experience that hey, this place is built for you, that it's welcome, that we can build a relationship,
Okay.
or you have it more like it's a booking experience. So that kind of sets the tone. And on the other hand, because in the population we work with, drugs are so prominent, and you can have behavior issues because of mental health. We have to be concerned about safety. So how do you find those right balances? What's that? We talk about that balance between law and grace. Um, if I totally am about the law, then no one deserves a second chance, and it's just this.
Yeah.
If I'm totally about grace, whatever. Well, at what point do I enable behavior? At what point do I jeopardize somebody else's recovery? So how do I find that sweet spot of where that needs to be? And I think that sweet spot, I think it's what we try to really work through, is through relationship. Because if I'm holding if I'm holding a stranger accountable, you're not going to take it well. If I've already invested in you, I've already built a relationship with you, we've created common ground, we've broken bread, and then I go, hey dude, you're hurting yourself, let's do something different. I'm going to be heard more. Then that's what my first conversation with you is, you're messing up, and I've not got engaged with you. And so that's the challenge sometimes with bigger numbers and so on, is we're right from your first minutes having to maybe hold you accountable. So how do we get it where accountability is important, to have a relationship that I can give influence with you. If you started using at 13, you're frozen at that time. If you've never had that father or mother influence in your life, you maybe don't even have some of these resources. You don't have that moral compass.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's where we have to have trust. You have to go, I want a different way. But that's relational based.
Wow, I love that law and grace. I was just talking to my friend the other day about like, do people deserve second chances? Do some people deserve second chances? Do some not? And I was I thought that, no matter what they did, I think you should at least get 1 second chance. Because if you don't, it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like I'm being very graceful. But I also don't think you should. If you continue to do it, well, then, like you said, you're enabling it to a point.
So one of the things is, we used to suspend people, bar people, and that's one of the things we try to get rid of that language. But there are people that maybe aren't doing the things they're supposed to be doing. And so one of the things just saying you need to go, what we do is say, okay, this is what you need to do. So maybe there was a behavioral thing. Well, let's figure out how not to do that. And hey, if you go to an anger management class, we'll let you right back in. Some point we do need to put the ball in people's court.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems though is often accountability has not been about correction of change. It's been to just get rid of that person. So you got somebody that's already isolated. You're holding them accountable. They just take that as that's just more crap going downhill. On the other hand, if you don't change your behavior, it endangers other people. So how do I develop influence, and how do I have it if I'm asking to do something that it's in a spirit of correction, not in a spirit that we're just done with you?
Mm.
And that's the balance. And once again, that becomes back relationship, trust, spending the time. Do we explain the why? One of the things I really work with staff is, if you're just given the because I said so, and everything is here. And on the other hand, we've explained why, and you still do it. Well, there needs to be a consequence. But that then becomes corrective, not reactionary. A lot of our folks who have come from dysfunctional families have never had corrective discipline. Mom was just stressed out all the time. Maybe she was using a different boyfriend all the time, and didn't care what the kids did. And then one day, all of a sudden, that behavior of being loud, which wasn't a problem yesterday, was today because she has a boyfriend there, and just goes and whacks Tommy on the head. Well, yesterday it was okay. Now it's not okay. And Tommy's now whacked in the head. And so he's now reacting. That wasn't corrective discipline. So there wasn't a correction there. So now we have an expectation that I can hold somebody accountable, and they know what correction is because they've always have had reaction area. One of the things that sometimes happens in the name of grace is maybe we don't hold people accountable. We put up with, we just kind of want to help them out. We want to just da-da-da. And then finally we get to our wit's end, and now we lash out and become reactionary too. Well, that's all they've known. So what does correction look like?
Mm-hmm.
How do we put it into your court and say, man, I believe in you, but you obviously right now aren't believing in yourself. So if you do this, this, and this, man, the door's open. Let's get you. The ball is in your court. All people will say, you threw me out. And I said, really? Did I really throw you out? And it's interesting because I usually am not even involved. And I'll say, so you just were minding your own business and we threw you out. Or were there things that you did and we told you what you could do to get back in and you just chose not to do them yet?
Probably right. That one, right?
Yeah. It's like, so let's have that conversation.
Yeah.
And let's put that ball in your court. But one of the things is a lot of people who maybe now are ready to change, they don't know how. So if we're not sitting alongside of them, and we can't now have an expectation that they're going to go from here. And so, man, now they're ready to change, but their language still is a little salty. We got to kind of go, okay, are you meeting us halfway?
Mm-hmm.
Only use the F word maybe 4 times in a sentence instead of 8. But as long as we're making progress, let's work through this.
Absolutely. I love that. So Be More Ventures, our mission statement is, empowering you to be more physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. So everything you're saying, being just a little bit more progress. It doesn't matter if you're still messing up, but just a little more progress. I'm all about that. Like 1.1% better. It's not even about being 1% better. As long as you're doing something, I really, really value that. So I love that you guys are kind of approaching with that mindset and helping change lives. What is something that you see the Kansas City public, get wrong about our homeless population out here?
Well, I think the biggest thing is we want to simplify everything. We want the one answer, there isn't. We want the
Okay.
one solution, there isn't. And so what tends to happen is you see this person with a sign, and so you give them money. Well, that might not help them, and then you get disillusioned about that you gave the money because you felt that the person was there the next day still doing it, didn't get them off there. So then that's your image of the entire homeless population. And so you've now lumped everybody into one thing. And so these aren't short-term things, these are long-term things. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. If you want to make an impact in somebody's life, you can't do it in 30 seconds with a $5 bill.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about investing. And so volunteering, do that mentoring, make that commitment. When we look at the story in the Bible of the Good Samaritan, the Good Samaritan comes upon the injured person. The two professionals of the day that should have helped them walked on the other side, the Levi and the priest. The Good Samaritan, who was from the other side of the tracks, was not considered by society as the person that could help. Took the risk because it could have been robbers out in the woods. But the thing is that sometimes get missed in that Bible verse is that he took him to an inn, and not only did he take care of his wounds, but told the innkeeper he's going to be back for a week, and if there was anything else that needed to be done, he would cover it then. And so it wasn't this short-term thing; it was this long-term thing. And I think often we're looking for these big, grand things to help 100 people that really don't help them, versus finding that one way to be significant with one person. And whether that's volunteering at the mission, at Shelter KC, or another place, or being sensitive to the world around you. Because the same person that sometimes gives the money to the person who's got the sign has a coworker that they're working with that may not ask, but it's that single mom that missed a rent payment, and maybe that's the person to take the little offering from that keeps them from getting homeless. Mm-hmm. And so, but because they don't ask, so how do you make the best impact? Are you looking for the big grand stuff, or are you looking for the very targeted how you can be used to make a difference?
That's really good. I think a lot of people, me myself included, want to do so much good at scale right now, immediately, but it's not realistic. It's not how change really happens, right? It does have to be on the individual basis, I think.
One of the things that is a challenge in our society is relationships have become a challenge.
I agree.
I'm 57 years old, so I'm probably a little older than you. And so schools were different. You could have a relationship with a teacher in a different way. If a student became homeless, the teacher took you home. Well, now we see all this stuff with teachers about sexual stuff and accusations against teachers or students, or even if the teacher hasn't done it, the possible accusation. And so what's happened is we've all become very protective because, man, there's been some abuse. But what's happened is we no longer are a relational society. And so I can either give you something, or I can really take the time and develop a relationship. Well, when I develop a relationship, there is risk there. That person could take from me. That person could steal from me, and so on. And so you don't want to have that happen. So the challenge is, how do you have the right relationship? How do you have boundaries that protect you from accusations, or doesn't put you susceptible, or don't put you in the position to hurt people? We want to make sure we're protecting people. But the answer isn't to have no relationships, is to have the right relationships. And I think that's where, people know neighbors like they used to. How much your coworkers, are you doing things outside of work? Not as much. And so what does it mean to have that positive relationship with somebody? that gives you the ability to have influence with them.
I was talking to my friend the other day, and she said that she's afraid to open up. She's like, "Yeah, Alex, you're very open with people. I have a hard time doing that." I said, you know, there's always a risk you're going to get burned, always. But the upside of you reaching out and being open could far outweigh the downside. You know what I mean? And I guess at that point, talk about developing relationships. You can really change people's lives. Doing it slowly but surely and putting yourself out there and developing that relationship, and just but with the mindset that I think we all have to have a realistic expectation that you could get burned. I mean, that's okay.
Well, and that's why I think it's really important to have those relationships within the confines of other structures. So, for example, that's why support groups, because then there's some rules on that, and it's not just one-on-one. It's a support group through churches, through volunteering. I think that's where the challenge is hey, great relationship. Bring a homeless person into your home and have them live with you. Well, man, there's a lot of risks with that, and there's no boundary with that, and man, that could be a disaster. So what happens is, well, that's not good. So the question is what is the right kind of relationship? Yeah. And the thing is, it takes commitment. A lot of people will say, man, I really want to volunteer. And it's like, okay, we'll fill out an application. I don't want to take the time to do that. Well,
okay.
You're just going to,
do you care or not, man?
Yeah. And so we're going to have some structure. We're going to have some things that you need to do.
So, talking about that reminded me of this time when I was in Milwaukee. I worked with a guy who was he was sometimes sleep at a buddy's house, but sometimes he'd sleep outside. He was homeless, and I worked with him. I talked to him. He was really smart. He did his fair share of substances, but at its core, he knew what he was talking about. Generally, he wasn't some crazy guy. He had crazy moments, but I mean, I don't. Crazy is a bad word to say, but he had some really sporadic moments. But for the most part, I really like this guy. And I saw him as a human. Sometimes I think people don't see the homeless population as a human.
Behavior doesn't define who you are. It just defines that behavior.
What do you mean?
So somebody that has a drug addiction issue, that still doesn't define who they are. They're still somebody's son. They still can be a sports fan. I can find we want to make that where that defines who they are. That may be what puts them in bondage. That may be what keeps them down. But that's not who they are.
Yeah. Well, I come to find that out with this gentleman. So over time, he kind of came to me. He's like, "Hey, listen, I'll pay you some money. Let me stay at your house." You know what I mean? On a couple nights of the week. I said, "Okay, that's kind of sounds good to me." I trust him to the point where, why not? You know what I mean? I like you, and this was the best part. He had left our job. He had left and found another job, and he got his own apartment. And he hit me up. He was like, "Hey, I got my own apartment now." I was like, "Dude, that's sick." And I was moving out, and I was moving, coming back to Kansas City, and so I gave him my bed, and I just got to see his spot, and it was so, it was like, it was just really good, it was good to feel because he was trying, and I think I think you brought up a really good point in that we kind of box the homeless population in as the people that are on the street that may not do anything with the money you give them, but there's got to be way more than this one little subsection of our homeless population that deserve help, deserve compassion and grace. That's awesome that you're doing all this stuff, man. I'm really grateful for you doing that, and hopefully I can do a little bit of stuff with the clothing that we gathered for y'all, and just keep a couple more people a little warmer than they would have normally been.
Yeah, and like I said, and often that can be, one of the things. Winter's tough, but that person, by giving them a warm coat, that person that maybe would have not came into shelter, this might be the time that we engage, and
Gotcha.
and we're always looking. That person might only be coming to be warm or get a coat, but we're always looking the next step of, okay, so does this build a dialogue for this? Does this make the connection here? they might not see that they can go from here to here, but that's not how we're thinking. We're always going, okay, so how do we use this opportunity?
That's great. That's really great. You guys are thinking 5 steps ahead. Cool. Eric, do you, so if somebody would like to volunteer or contribute in any way, how could they go about doing
Well,
that?
the best thing to find out about us is just to go to shelterkc.org. And everything about volunteering is right there, or to get help, or also check us out. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Those are the things. We got kind of a neat thing that we're doing. It's a fundraiser thing, but we've challenged the mission in Dallas that we're doing a thing called Tackle Homelessness, to see who can raise the most money in each city.
Okay.
And then relate it to the Dallas Cowboys coming to play the Chiefs.
Okay.
And so that's something you can follow kind of on Facebook. We got kind of some things that if you make donations, we have a Frank Clark football we're giving away. We've had Casey Wolf has been down.
Cool.
But kind of trying to have a little fun. But the neat thing about it is it's kind of encouraging both cities to kind of see who can raise the most money. But that then gets help in each of those cities.
Absolutely.
And so hopefully I'm not going to have to wear a Dallas Cowboys jersey. But so hopefully we will both win the actual game and also in raising the most money.
Is that the bet that's on the line? Whoever loses got to wear the other guy's jersey?
Yeah.
What jersey have you picked, if you had to?
Well, he's Bruce. I'm sure it'll be a Prescott jersey, which that's actually a little. Wearing a Dak. If I've got to wear a jersey, wearing a Dak jersey isn't probably too bad to wear.
Yeah.
But I spent 10 years in Texas before coming here, and I never could be the Cowboys fan. Careful, but the Chiefs fan are real. You don't see tailgating. You don't see people of all walks of life going to game. In other places,
in Dallas.
Yeah, Dallas. You got it. Dallas, a regular season ticket costs you $500-$600 all the time. Now there's sometimes down in Arrowhead it's starting to get that way.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see the tailgate experience. It's all about high money. It's all about this. The pure fan experience that you have in Kansas City is it just isn't that way. I mean, mm-hmm. I just never, like I said, spent 10 years there.
Yeah.
Now my heart, I still got some Seahawks. To me, I'll admit that, but my time in Texas, I just couldn't ever be I couldn't do it.
Well, we welcome you with open arms. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I got
Chiefs Kingdom, baby. So this is my hoodie that I got out. I don't know if you could tell, but it's Be More, right? That's our whole ideology. That's our whole message. But the Mo I singled out and kind of did it with some Chiefs gradient. Because I think that's what brings us, if anything, that's what brings Kansas City together more than, more than anything. If it's not barbecue, it's got to be the Chiefs, you know what I mean? Which is, I did this whole podcast centered around barbecue with the idea of like breaking bread, getting to know people and making connections and enjoying Kansas City, So maybe somebody out there watching in Seattle or Dallas will be like, Kansas City don't seem too bad, So yeah, Eric, this is an awesome conversation. Guys, like you said, Eric said, if you want to go and volunteer, check out shelterkc.org. Also, they've got that fundraiser going on. Check them out on Facebook, Instagram, and see if you want to contribute. You got an avenue through Eric and Shelter KC to contribute to helping that homeless population out here in Kansas City. They're deserving of help, guys. The Winter Clothing Drive was a huge success. It's wrapped up. I'm going to donate the clothes tomorrow, but as far as that goes, we were eating Jousting Pigs barbecue, and we didn't really eat much today, but sometimes that's just how it goes.
When I'm done talking, I'll start eating.
My man, yes sir. And guys, if you want to check us out and support Be More Ventures, We got plenty of things coming down the pipeline. Just need a little bit of time to execute. Check out BeMoreVentures.org. That's it. That's a wrap.